Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If fishing system in Food Wars world. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Quick update. The series What If Transmigrated as a Kanto gym leader will be going on hold soon, since we've nearly caught up with the author. So now, I need your help picking the next project for the channel. I'm currently deciding between these three fanfics. What if Reborn in Highschool DxD as a Lucifuge? What if Transmigrated to medieval Pokemon world? What if creating the strongest Strawhat crew by reading manga? Please vote in the poll and let me know which story you'd like to see next. I'll take the top pick and start working on that series next. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 131, Slaying the Tundra Dragon, Knocking Master Jiro's Lesson. Jiro was a gourmet hunter, and a gourmet hunter's life was a quest for all kinds of delicacies. Although the Tundra Dragon was known as the gatekeeper of the ice hell, its existence didn't really affect the region's ecosystem. If capturing an ingredient would cause immense environmental damage, Jiro wouldn't touch it. But the Tundra Dragon clearly wasn't in that category. The same went for the hellbarrows that Jiro had used knocking on. Without them, the ice hell would remain the ice hell. Besides, almost no one would think of coming to a place like this to hunt for ingredients. The ice hell was simply too dangerous. Anyone who arrived would be turned into a popsicle in minutes. While a thermal suit offered some protection, it couldn't completely block the invasive cold. If it weren't for the century soup, very few people would ever be willing to set foot in this place. Possessing gourmet cells didn't automatically make one a powerhouse. Leveling up gourmet cells was no easy feat. Just look at Toriko and his friends, their rapid growth was bought with their lives. Plenty of others with gourmet cells would spend their entire lives stuck at level 20, or even below 10. At that moment, a powerful aura erupted from Yuki. Though there was no shadow of an appetite demon, his sheer presence was enough to suppress the Tundra Dragon. No appetite demon shadow? What's the deal with his gourmet cells? Jiro was taken aback. He didn't have an appetite demon shadow either, but that was because he had completely merged with his demon as a child. He was a living appetite demon. While gourmet cells could parasitize any living thing, only humans could awaken an appetite demon. The process of getting stronger was a process of continuously tapping into that demon's power. But this was the first time Jiro had seen someone like Yuki release their full aura without a shadow. He could sense that Yuki was holding nothing back. Hiding one's appetite demon was possible when not at full power, but at maximum output, even the likes of Midora would manifest a demonic shadow. The only explanation was that Yuki's gourmet cells either hadn't awakened any appetite demon, or his demon was incredibly unique. While Jiro was lost in thought, the Tundra Dragon in the sky let out another furious roar, its massive body diving down from above. Although Yuki's aura could suppress the dragon, it wasn't strong enough to subdue it completely unless his cell level was over 100, that might be possible. As the gatekeeper of the ice hell and its true king since the hellbarrows was sealed a century ago, the Tundra Dragon found the situation utterly unacceptable. To be suppressed by the aura of a mere human was the ultimate insult. It fought through its fear, determined to tear this human to shreds and defend its royal dignity. Now you've entered my domain. Watching the diving dragon, Yuki just smiled. Countless strands of his hair had already formed a massive net, just waiting for the Tundra Dragon to fly right into it. These strands weren't acting alone. Yuki knew a single strand of hair couldn't possibly pierce the Tundra Dragon's defenses. So, he had bundled them together, forming over 300 incredibly powerful spikes. These hair spikes were lying in wait. As the dragon dove, Yuki's vision analyzed its body structure. And above the Tundra Dragon, he saw a death sign looming. While the appearance of a death sign didn't guarantee a creature's demise, the probability was extremely high. Just as the Tundra Dragon was about to reach Yuki, its body came to an abrupt halt in midair. Simultaneously, the ice beneath Yuki's feet shattered violently. Boom! With a deafening roar, hundreds of meters of ice were obliterated. Such was the force of the Tundra Dragon's charge. Yuki had redirected the impact, causing the surrounding environment to be devastated. That technique to disperse the force. It's not from food honor. That's an Enbu skill, isn't it? You've already mastered the basics and even improved upon them. Watching Yuki's evasive maneuver, Jiro instantly recognized it as Enbu. Though he didn't use it himself, he had seen it before. A being of Jiro's caliber didn't need to learn something like Enbu. They had their own unique powers. Take his damage knocking, for example. That technique allowed him to seal a portion of the damage he received within his body and redirect the rest outwards. In the original story, Jiro frequently used this move when fighting the Blue Nitro. The released force alone was enough to leave massive scars on the planet. And the damage Jiro sealed within his body was enough to destroy several Earths. Damage knocking was a type of redirection technique. If not for its flaws, it would be an invincible ability. Its greatest weakness was that if an enemy discovered the location where the force was stored, it could be fatal. That's what happened to Jiro. Acacia released the damage stored in his body, killing him instantly. I learned a bit before, but I haven't mastered much. The environment I was in wasn't suitable for training Enbu. Yuki knew that the best way to improve his Enbu was to find a place with abnormal gravity. He knew of such a place in the human world, the Heavy Hole near Milk Mountain. He planned to go there, but not now. The main storyline hadn't even begun yet. He intended to finish the important things first. Whether it was learning from Jiro or Setsuno, these were rare opportunities. He wasn't about to chase pennies and lose dollars, he knew which was more important. At this point, the Tundra Dragon was completely stunned. It found itself floating in mid-air, utterly unable to move, as if its body was no longer its own. Besides its eyes, not a single part of it would respond. Yuki hadn't wasted any time fighting the Tundra Dragon. This was something Jiro had constantly emphasized during his knocking lessons. Jiro had said that if you have the ability to kill in one shot, you should go all out and do it, leaving no room for error. Although Jiro himself made that mistake in the original story, he was facing his own teacher, Acacia, and he had questions that needed answers. That was the only reason for the hesitation. Otherwise, Jiro would never hold back. Once he attacked, it was always a kill shot, just as he did against the Blue Nitro. Whenever Jiro got an opening, he would immediately use a fatal technique to finish his opponent. That was the nature of combat in the world of Toriko. It was fine in the early stages, but later on, it was basically, I one-shot you, or you one-shot me. Fights in that world didn't drag on for days and nights like in One Piece, with characters constantly getting back up. Honestly, the power scaling in One Piece was just broken. The author wanted to show the strength of these powerhouses through prolonged battles. But they couldn't quite figure out how to draw a fight that lasted for days. The power of the top tiers in One Piece wasn't incapable of breaking through defenses. On the contrary, if they went all out, it would be easy. But they always seemed to be playing around, never going for the kill, and absolutely never finishing the job after a fight. That kind of thing was infuriating to watch. In contrast, in the world of Toriko, they went all out from the start, never wasting time with trash talk if they could just kill the opponent. Yuki was well aware of this, and after Jiro's emphasis, he made it his own principle. When using knocking on the Tundra Dragon, he had prepared for two outcomes. If the knocking failed, his flames would have pierced the dragon's head in the next instant. So, the Tundra Dragon was doomed to be one-shot by Yuki no matter what. This was mainly due to the huge power gap between them. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easy for Yuki to kill it. Not bad. Your timing was perfect. But it was still a bit reckless. You should have dodged its attack route before applying the knocking. If its attack power had exceeded your defensive limit, you would have been a sitting duck. Jiro nodded. Yuki's timing was flawless. The only issue was his overconfidence. Hearing this, Yuki paused for a moment, then it dawned on him. It was true, he had no real combat experience, especially not against ferocious beasts. Just as Jiro said, if his hair hadn't restrained the tundra dragon, he would have become a living target. And even if he had his flames ready, what if they didn't have the expected effect? The most crucial part of a battle was self-preservation. Even Jiro followed this rule. In the original story, when he fought the Blue Nitro, he took one of their jewels, which saved his life at first. I understand. Survival comes first. Only by staying alive can you fight back. Yuki nodded. Whether defending, attacking, or coming up with a plan, you should never put yourself in the most dangerous position unless absolutely necessary. You're a smart one. You get it right away. Jiro nodded. He appreciated that about Yuki, he understood things immediately without needing long-winded explanations. Looking at the tundra dragon before him, Yuki condensed his calories into his hand, and with an arm like a blade, he swung down. The tundra dragon's head was cleanly severed. You don't have your own dedicated kitchen knife? Seeing Yuki's fighting style, Jiro asked with some confusion. In the world of Toriko, a chef's knife was used not only for cutting vegetables but also for combat. Almost every chef chose to do so, even Komatsu. In the original story, Komatsu used his knife to fend off beasts in the gourmet pyramid to save his own life. He had heard from Setsuno that Yuki was a formidable chef, yet such a powerful chef didn't have his own exclusive knife. I have knives, but they aren't exclusive to me, and they can't be used to cut beasts like the tundra dragon. Although the 7-star knives were powerful tools, they wouldn't work in this world. Not because of their special abilities, but because of their hardness. The beasts in this world were too strong. Even after they died and their bodies softened, you still needed a very good knife to cut them. Komatsu's Diraus knife, Fong of the Dragon King, was a perfect example. No exclusive knife, huh? In that case, when you get back, you should find some time to visit Milk Mountain. We'll write you a letter of introduction. You should have no problem cutting the line then. Although that guy Milk took a commission from Ichiryu and is busy with other things, the current second-generation Milk is also quite good. Jiro offered. I'll find time to go when I get back. Yuki nodded. He certainly hoped to have his own exclusive milk knife. And if he went now, he could probably intercept the Fong of the Dragon King that was meant for Komatsu. Yuki wasn't about to pass up the chance to acquire a knife made from such a material. As for Komatsu, he could just have Toriko find him another knife material. Let's leave the tundra dragon's corpse here for now. We'll pick it up on our way back. Jiro said after glancing at the body. Yuki nodded. This was the world of Toriko, so it was best not to reveal all his cards. For example, his system's storage space. Although he could blame it on his appetite demon's ability, it was better not to use such a move unless he was alone. To avoid raising suspicion, Yuki collected some blood from the tundra dragon and the other ingredients he captured along the way for his experiment. Now, all they had to do was find the wall penguins. Chapter 132, The Gourmet Show Window, the best teacher of ingredient fusion. Looks like we'll have to go inside the ice mountain. After repeated failed experiments along the way, Jiro realized that the animals on the periphery rarely ventured into the mountain's interior. The century soup was born deep beneath the ice mountain, so the creatures outside were unlikely to be the key. Still, they had tested the outer creatures just in case. Upon entering the ice mountain, the howling wind ceased. It couldn't penetrate this deep. Yuki's gourmet cells were rapidly adapting to the environment. His adaptation speed was far faster than Jiro had estimated, one of the benefits of a system-provided ability. His growth-type abilities didn't just increase his level, his gourmet cell's upper limit, recovery, and adaptability were all growing along with him. That was why Jiro had misjudged his adaptation speed. Found it. The ruler of the ice hell, the Hellboros. I was drunk back then, and this guy was in my way, so I just used knocking on it. Jiro said, looking at the Hellboros before them. He hadn't intended for the knocking to last so long, but since he was drunk at the time, he'd been a little heavy-handed. For the Hellboros, it was torture. After being knocked, its body was immobilized, but its consciousness remained. Even if its intelligence wasn't high, it was still a living being. It had to be said, knocking was a truly brutal technique sometimes. Yuki could clearly see the special electromagnetic waves emanating from the Hellboros. Its consciousness was awake. Upon sensing Jiro, besides some resentment, the overwhelming feeling it radiated was fear. To undo the knocking on the Hellboros, you need mid-level knocking. With that, Jiro tapped the ice encasing the Hellboros with his hand. The next second, the ice shattered, and the imprisoned Hellboros was finally able to move. The Hellboros looked massive, but it was actually an insect, and it had no food value whatsoever. That's why no one bothered with it, even though it had been knocked for so long. Its flesh was completely rotten. This thing was absolutely inedible. Yuki had no desire to eat it. The moment the ice shattered, a foul stench assaulted his nostrils. Roar! Freed, all of the Hellboros' heads let out excited roars. But it quickly realized it couldn't stay here, not with Jiro around. The Hellboros would never forget the being who had sealed it for 100 years. This human was too powerful. If he wanted to, he could kill it in an instant. It had no desire to be sealed again, so it fled at its top speed. This guy's a real coward. I already released it, why would I knock it and seal it again? Jiro shook his head with a chuckle. That's what you think, but that's not what it's thinking. After being sealed for 100 years, seeing the person who can easily seal and kill you running away is the most normal reaction. Yuki smiled. Anyone would choose to flee in that situation. Well, let's not talk about that. By the way, aren't you going to take that thing's blood? Jiro asked. That thing is inedible. We're better off testing the blood of other animals. Yuki shook his head. The Hellboros reeked, and its flesh was like carrion. If he didn't know which ingredient he was looking for, he might have tried it. But since he did, there was no way he was going to test this thing's blood. Good point. Let's find other animals. Jiro nodded, and the two continued on until they reached the location of the gourmet show window. It's really completely dry. The last time I was here, there was still plenty of century soup. Looking at the completely barren ice pond, Jiro couldn't help but shake his head. This was where the century soup appeared. Even if it hadn't matured, soup would gather here, and when the time came, it would mature naturally. After maturing, an aurora would appear. But now, there wasn't a single drop of soup left. So this is the gourmet show window. Yuki looked up at the various ingredients displayed above. That's right. These are ingredients sealed here by the humans who used to live in this area. Unfortunately, with the changing times, no one lives here anymore. Many of the ingredients here are also extinct. It took sets of decades to find substitutes for them. After I was here last time, Yusaku also came. According to his inspection, the gourmet show window has reached its limit. He said this should be the last time it produces the century soup. But now it seems even that guy makes mistakes. Looks like it's already dried up this time. Jiro shook his head. No, it hasn't dried up. I can clearly see the flow, but it's not here. It seems the birthplace of the century soup isn't just in one spot. Yuki had spotted some tiny cracks in the gourmet show window. The number of ingredients in the show window was immense, and its scope was vast. So, it was normal for there to be multiple birthplaces for the century soup. Yuki could see faint nutrients flowing towards another direction, and he could clearly see the tiny pipes connecting the ingredients below. These pipes weren't man-made, they were formed over a long time by the flow of essence. A normal person's naked eye couldn't see these things. And the people who came here were almost all powerful gourmet hunters, very few were chefs. Even if a chef did come, without Yuki's evolving vision, it would be difficult to see the things in the gourmet show window clearly. Yuki discovered that these naturally formed pipes weren't random. On the contrary, based on the position of the ingredients, the order in which the extracted essences merged was completely different. But he couldn't observe the entire process from this one spot, so he needed to find the entire gourmet show window. Of course, before that, they had to finish the century soup experiment at hand. Led by Yuki, the two soon arrived at another ice cave. Here too was a pond, but this one had a shallow layer of liquid in it. This was the unfinished century soup. When it was complete, the aurora would appear. I didn't expect there to be another one. And there's still a little bit of century soup left. A pity it's not mature yet. Jiro found it a bit unfortunate. If it were the mature century soup, they could just take it back directly. Master Jiro, there's movement over there. Let's go take a look, Yuki said. The two then walked towards a tunnel that was dozens of meters high. At the end of the tunnel was another massive ice cave. So it's wall penguins. Speaking of which, quite a few wall penguins in the ice hell have been hunted. These should be the last few remaining. Looking at the 3 wall penguins, 2 large, 1 small, Jiro remarked. He felt helpless about it. The extinction of many creatures was due to humans. Because humans captured these ingredients, and for profit, they even fished to exhaustion. The Gourmet Corp was the most typical example. That's why the Gourmet Corp was reviled by everyone. Although the earth was constantly creating new ingredients, humans couldn't just recklessly drive other creatures to extinction. As a child raised by the Wolf King, and having lived with Acacia and the others, Jiro knew the importance of nature. He would never casually destroy it. But he couldn't control others. Although the IGO also cracked down on such behavior, as long as there was enough profit, there would still be people willing to take the risk. This is probably what we're looking for. This family of wall penguins lives in a place connected to the birthplace of the century soup. We can try their blood, Yuki said. He had no intention of killing these wall penguins. He wasn't a member of the Gourmet Corp, he wouldn't do such a thing. Of course, if it were an ingredient he was interested in, he would capture it directly. The smallest wall penguin should be Yun from the original story, Komatsu's pet. Because its parents were casually killed by members of the Gourmet Corp, it had no choice but to follow Komatsu. It eventually became the key to completing the century soup. Neither Yuki nor Jiro had any intention of killing the wall penguins, so they both opted for knocking. Yuki didn't even need to act. Jiro stomped on the ground, and the force traveled through the ground to the 3 wall penguins. Instantly, the 3 of them passed out. It's easier to work with them knocked out, Jiro said with a smile. Yuki didn't hesitate. Since they were already down, he would just take a bit of blood, it wouldn't cause them any harm. Taking a single drop of blood, Yuki placed it in a box containing the semi-finished century soup. As the drop of blood entered, the red color quickly vanished into the transparent soup. The next second, a small aurora appeared above the box. It's done. It's the wall penguin's blood. Seeing this, Jiro's face lit up with joy. It was a success, which meant that Yuki's and Setsuno's theories were correct. And Setsuno's century-long obsession could finally be put to rest. 100 years. For the sake of the century soup, Setsuno had truly spent a century. And it wasn't that she had spent all this time just to get to this point. Decades ago, her century soup was already just one step away from completion. It was this final step that had stumped her for decades. So, seeing the century soup finally completed, Jiro was naturally ecstatic. Looks like these wall penguins have been drinking the century soup since their ancestors' time. By the way, Master Jiro, you should take the century soup back first. I might need to stay here for a while, Yuki said. Stay for a while? Why? To adapt to the environment? But with your gourmet cell's current state, the time it takes to walk out of the ice cell should be enough. Hearing this, Jiro was a bit confused. What did Yuki want to do here? Was it for the century soup? But it would still be some time before it matured. And they already had the finished product in their hands. Why wait for the immature one? I want to stay here because of this. Yuki pointed upwards. The gourmet show window? The essence of the ingredients in the gourmet show window has basically been squeezed dry. Even if you take the ingredients out, it's useless. Jiro shook his head. He still remembered what Yusaku had said. If it were Yusaku or Moyen Sheishai, they might be able to save the gourmet show window, but Moyen Sheishai had disappeared, and Yusaku didn't seem to have any intention of doing so. It's not for the ingredients, but for the gourmet show window itself. I'm a chef, and my eyesight is pretty good. When I was observing the gourmet show window just now, I noticed that there are extremely fine, natural channels beneath the ingredients. These channels merge the essences extracted from the ingredients in different orders and at different times, ultimately forming the century soup. So, the gourmet show window is an incredible treasure for me. I need to stay here to study the fusion of these ingredients. I'll go back after I've thoroughly analyzed the entire process. Yuki explained his reason. The gourmet show window was like a natural teacher to him, so studying here for a while would be very useful. I see. Now that you mention it, I see it too. A pity I'm not a chef and not interested in the process. In that case, I'll take the century soup back. With your strength, you won't be in any danger here. Jiro nodded. He couldn't stay here with Yuki forever, he had to take the century soup back to Setsuno. As for whether Yuki would be in danger here, there was no need to worry. In his view, with Yuki's strength, even the Hellboros couldn't do anything to him, let alone other creatures. Right, and the Tundra Dragon's corpse. Please help me take it back too. Yuki suddenly remembered the Tundra Dragon. If left there, once its aura dissipated, it would be eaten by other beasts. I'll move it back. I'll leave the jellyfish for you, too. I'll go back on my own. With that, Jiro left. Chapter 133, The Century Soup is Born, Yuki's Findings. For a being like Knocking Master Jiro, whether he took a camping monster or not made little difference. With his speed, if he truly wished it, he could circle the entire globe in an incredibly short amount of time. So, Jiro left the limousine jellyfish for Yuki and simply ran back himself. Yuki knew the extent of Jiro's power, so he didn't bother with false modesty. After Jiro's departure, he began to study the gourmet show window, continuously analyzing the fusion process of the ingredients. As for the century soup, he could just as easily drink it after he returned. For now, the ice hell was a perfectly safe place to be. After leaving, Jiro returned to Setsuno Dining Hall at astonishing speed. Though he didn't have the camping monster, it didn't take him long at all. That's an aurora. It looks like you succeeded this time. But why didn't Yuki come back with you? Setsuno's face lit up with delight when she saw Jiro and the box in his hands. The aurora meant that the century soup was complete. And having even one finished portion meant she could now create a near-endless supply. But she was surprised 2 people had left, and only 1 had returned. She didn't believe for a second that anyone could threaten Jiro to the point where he would abandon Yuki and flee. There had to be a special reason. That kid stayed behind in the ice hell. According to him. Jiro relayed what Yuki had told him. I see. Using the gourmet show window as his teacher. If he can see those things, then it will indeed be of great use to him. In that case, we'll leave him be. Setsuno nodded. She then took the century soup Jiro had brought and returned to her underground kitchen, approaching the largest of her pots. Just as before, Setsuno, Jiro, and Nono leaped onto the platform. Setsuno poured the finished century soup from the box directly into the massive cauldron. The next second, though the soup itself showed no change, a brilliant aurora shot up from above the pot, piercing through the ground and erupting into the sky. The scale of the aurora depended on the scale of the century soup. The amount Setsuno had here was thousands, even tens of thousands of times greater than what the ice hell produced in a century. With a soup of this magnitude, the resulting aurora was, of course, terrifyingly immense. Looks like everyone in Gourmet Town is about to find out you've completed the century soup, Setsu. Jiro said with a laugh, watching the spectacle. Let them know. I'm not afraid of a little trouble. Setsuno wasn't concerned. Her status was clear. No one could pry the recipe for the century soup from her hands, and she had no intention of ever making it public. Meanwhile, outside, a colossal aurora had enveloped the entirety of Gourmet Town. That's the aurora of the century soup. Why is it appearing now? It's not time for it to mature yet. And why is it so massive? That direction, is that Ms. Setsuno? At the top of the gourmet tower, Yuda stared in shock. Many chefs had witnessed the aurora phenomenon of the century soup before. Every chef who had ever tasted it had tried to replicate it, but all had failed, including Yuda himself. Even the legendary Granny Setsuno had been unable to recreate it, so no one else held out much hope. But now, the aurora was erupting from the vicinity of Setsuno Dining Hall. It had to be her. She had finally completed the century soup. Yuda's shock quickly turned to calculation as he began to wonder what gift he should bring on his visit tomorrow. He, too, longed to taste the century soup once more. In the original story, the only ones who went searching for the century soup were insignificant characters. This was because anyone with a bit of status knew it was on the verge of extinction. It simply wasn't worth the trip. Otherwise, given the soup's effects, it would have been impossible for only a few small fry in Toriko's group to be the ones going after it. The Gourmet Corp's response was the more logical one, sending a sous chef, a branch chief, and even a powerhouse like Alfaro who could enter the gourmet world. Although Setsuno also went, she was there to save people, not to claim the soup. She knew she could no longer complete her own version and could only place her hopes in Komatsu. The reason these other high-level figures didn't go was because of Yusaku's words. After all, Yusaku was an incredibly powerful figure among the revivers. The only reason Moyen Sheishai, and not him, became a gourmet national treasure was because of his crude behavior. A title like Gourmet National Treasure required a certain public image, and Yusaku couldn't care less about such things, so the title ultimately went to Moyen Sheishai. In hindsight, it was a good thing for Yusaku that he didn't get the title. Moyen Sheishai had been controlled by Joie precisely because of that fame. As for why Joie didn't control others, it wasn't for lack of trying. It was either because the other national treasures were useless to control, or because they were too powerful and difficult to subdue. The news of Setsuno completing the century soup spread rapidly across the globe. She actually made the century soup? In that case, we can cancel the plan to go to the ice hell. Upon seeing the news, the wealthy man who had hired countless people to find the soup in the original story immediately abandoned his plans. With his financial power, he could simply buy it. And knowing Setsuno's character, she would certainly sell the century soup. He just needed to purchase some then. It wasn't just him, many gourmet hunters who had planned to go to the ice hell also gave up. They were mainly seeking the soup to sell for profit, not to eat it themselves. Now that Setsuno had made it, the price would naturally plummet. Once the price dropped, they had no reason to go to the ice hell. While the soup still had some value, a trip to the ice hell was a dance with death. Every time a large group went, only a few would return alive, and even fewer would succeed in capturing the soup. They weren't about to risk their lives for such a paltry sum. Ah, truly amazing. That's our Setsu, she really managed to make the century soup. At IGO headquarters, Ichiryu was overjoyed upon hearing the news and immediately called Setsuno. Ichiryu, is that you? It seems you've heard about the soup. Yes, I've completed it. It'll be a while before it goes on sale, though. I have a young man to thank for being able to finish it this time. Setsuno said with a smile. A young man? Is it your apprentice, Nono? Ichiryu was a bit surprised, his first thought going to Nono. No, it's a very interesting and promising young man. He's still in the ice hell at the moment, it'll probably be a few days before he's back. When he returns, you should come to my diner too, Ichiryu. Come taste the century soup. Setsuno offered. Ichiryu was even more surprised. For Setsuno to say that, she clearly intended to introduce this Yuki to him. He was incredibly curious. What kind of young man could make Setsuno hold him in such high regard, to the point of wanting to introduce him personally? I understand. I'll be waiting for your call then. After a few more words, Ichirio hung up. He was now full of anticipation. Who was this mysterious person that Setsuno thought so highly of? Of course, no matter who it was a good thing for them. The stronger their side became, the more at ease he felt. At the same time, the news reached the ears of the Gourmet Corp. That old hag actually made the century soup. She's really something. At the Gourmet Corp, a group of head chefs, sous chefs, and branch chiefs were gathered for a meeting. The topic of the meeting was, naturally, the century soup. The boss said to call off the trip to the ice hell. We'll just have someone buy the soup. Alfaro had just emerged from delivering a batch of dishes to Midora and relayed his orders to the group. No one was surprised. Although members of the Gourmet Corp couldn't directly purchase goods sold by Setsuno's company, they could always use proxies. So, the people of the Gourmet Corp weren't worried about being unable to buy her food. The news of Setsuno's completed century soup spread like wildfire through the human world, and many waited with bated breath for it to go on sale. A week later, Yuki finally returned to Setsuno Dining Hall aboard the limousine Jellyfish. You're finally back. You spent a week in the ice hell, looks like you gained quite a lot. Setsuno said, looking at Yuki. The harvest was indeed great. Right, I also organized the things I researched from the gourmet show window. With that, Yuki handed a tablet to Setsuno. It contained all his findings from the past week. Although he had established a connection with Setsuno and the others through the final step of the soup and by restoring her youth, relationships like these needed to be maintained. Mutual exchange was key. I can't believe you summarized so much in just 7 days. These findings are useful even for me, and they'll be a huge help to Nono. Thank you so much. Setsuno knew the value of this information with a single glance. Without a doubt, Yuki had given her another great gift. Now that he had given it to her, how she used it was up to her. This knowledge was enough to help her train a number of powerful chefs. After all, the number of chefs under her command was immense. In the original story, she had gathered 1 million, but that was far from her limit. The mobilization at that time was urgent, and people from all over the human world had fled to the central cities for refuge. Gathering 1 million people in such a short time was already an exaggeration. It meant the number of chefs under Setsuno's banner was several times that of 1 million. Among these chefs, there were naturally some she thought highly of and trained personally. The knowledge Yuki had summarized was incredibly important. From the key to fusing one ingredient to the fusion of over 100,000, it was a step-by-step guide, with all the critical points explained with perfect clarity. It could be said that as long as one wasn't a complete idiot, this data could allow a chef's skills to advance at an astonishing rate. It's very useful for me? Hearing this, Nono was quite surprised. Setsuno handed the tablet to her. As Nono began to read what was recorded on it, she became completely engrossed. Nono, you can look at that later when you're alone. Now is not the time. Seeing her apprentice so absorbed, Setsuno reminded her. Nono snapped back to reality and immediately thanked Yuki. Although he had given the data to Setsuno, she was the ultimate beneficiary, so she had to express her gratitude. Chapter 134, President Ichiria, A Taste of the Century Soup. With that, Setsuno went to make the calls, leaving Nono to wait with Yuki. Not long after she finished, there was a knock on the door of the diner. When Nono opened it, she saw a man with golden hair standing at the entrance. It was President Ichiryu. He was the oldest of the legendary powerhouses, and his current appearance was that of a middle-aged man verging on elderly. President Ichiryu, please come in. Nono immediately welcomed him inside. She had heard all about Ichiryu's exploits from her master and deeply admired him. Ichiryu was a man much like Kuma from One Piece, practically a saint. They were the epitome of selflessness, though not in a naive way, but in a purely laudable one. Both were men who would genuinely sacrifice their lives for others. Ichiryu, in particular, had devoted his entire life to the human world. He didn't found the IGO for power, but to reduce war and conflict. Any nation that joined the IGO saw an end to its wars. While there were still many war-torn regions, there wasn't much Ichiryu could do. He didn't establish the IGO to be a tyrannical organization, so he wouldn't excessively interfere with any country's will. The IGO's massive scale was also due to the support of these member nations, which provided research funds and other resources. These member nations weren't just throwing money away for nothing, they paid their dues and, in return, enjoyed the IGO's various services. But the IGO couldn't use that money for other things, like aiding civilians in war-torn regions. Helpless, the IGO had to rely on profits from the underground fighting arena to fund aid for these regions during special holidays. It was the only thing they could do. Ichiryu was a man without personal desires, he just wanted everyone to live well. This was one of the reasons he had to be banned from the story. Ichiryu was incredibly strong. If he had used the power of Dawn Slime, the two of them combined would have been an opponent Acacia could never hope to defeat. Furthermore, Acacia's plan was extremely risky. If a living Ichiryu had known the full details, he would have never let Acacia proceed. Over 500 years ago, Acacia had approached him, telling him he was about to do something very dangerous. If it succeeded, fine. If it failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. At that time, Acacia hadn't revealed the full plan, and Ichiryu hadn't yet founded the IGO, so he couldn't bring himself to stop him. But the Ichiryu of today was different. He had spent centuries developing the human world to its current state. While not completely peaceful, the vast majority of regions were. This peace was precious to him. He wouldn't allow anyone to destroy it, especially since if Acacia's plan failed, every living thing on Earth would be finished. So, Ichiryu had to be removed from the equation. Otherwise, Acacia truly stood no chance. The same went for Minora. He had eaten 6 of Acacia's full-course menu, but he absolutely could not eat the last 2. Otherwise, Acacia wouldn't have been a match for him. Nono idolized Ichiryu for dedicating his life to the human world. Yuki also deeply respected him, because Ichiryu was a man truly without desire. Yuki himself was very selfish, he kept the good things for himself. If he were Ichiryu, he might have founded an organization, but it certainly wouldn't have been like the IGO. It wouldn't have been like the Gourmet Corp either. The organization he would found would be more like Setsuno's company, helping others while also bringing himself sufficient benefits and convenience. It's been a while, Nono. You've grown a little. By the way, are you interested in finding a partner? Ichiryu suddenly asked. The 4 heavenly kings still didn't have partners, and the partnership between a chef and a gourmet hunter was crucial. Although Ichiryu himself didn't have a partner, he had followed Frozy back in the day, and even after her passing, he maintained contact with Setsuno. He also had the 3 great chefs of the Red Nitro, and Chichi had been his partner for a time. So, he didn't lack people to cook for him and thus never sought a permanent partner. Besides, he had no personal desires. As for Minora, he had plenty of partners, the entire Gourmet Corp served as his partners, though they were all temporary. No one could become his permanent partner unless Frozy was resurrected. Ichiryu treated the 4 heavenly kings like his own sons. Nono's culinary skills were undoubtedly strong, so he casually asked. I still have a lot to learn from Master. I'm not thinking about finding a partner for now. Nono said with a sweet smile. She wasn't just making an excuse, she truly did have much to learn. In the original story, Nono hadn't been impressed by anyone before meeting Komatsu. Even when she first saw Komatsu, she was surprised. In her eyes, he wasn't particularly outstanding, yet her master held him in such high regard. It wasn't until the 4-beast incident, when she was by his side, that she saw Komatsu's true strength. Komatsu could easily hear the voices of ingredients. Other chefs would rack their brains and still fail, but he could accomplish it with ease, a true cheat in the culinary world. And this young man is a new face. Seeing Yuki, President Ichiryu was also a bit surprised. He guessed this must be the person Setsuno wanted to introduce to him. He was very curious as to why Setsuno valued him so highly. In the past week, if Ichirio had wanted to investigate Yuki, he could have found out everything. But he didn't. He knew that anyone Setsuno valued would be of good character, so there was no need to waste time and energy investigating him. Hello, President Ichirio. My name is Yuki. I'm currently studying under Ms. Setsuno and Master Jiro. Yuki greeted him. He was basically unguarded around Ichirio. After all, he knew Ichirio's character inside and out. As long as you didn't harm nature or humanity, you were fine. Studying under both Setsu and Jiro? You're learning two disciplines at once? Ichirio was surprised. A person's energy was limited, learning one discipline made it difficult to focus on another. It was quite unexpected that Yuki was studying under both of them. He's the one I wanted to introduce you to. A very impressive young man. Setsuno told Ichirio about Yuki's talents. Ichirio was astonished, he had rarely seen Setsuno praise someone so highly. Just as they were talking, Jiro returned. It's been a long time, Ichirio. Jiro was happy to see him. He cared deeply for his family, and without a doubt, Ichirio was one of them. They were usually busy with their own affairs and didn't see each other often, but they would share any important information. Since everyone's here, let's have a taste of the century soup. We have Yuki to thank for its completion. Setsuno prepared a bowl of century soup for everyone and spoke. I didn't do much, just provided an idea. This soup is the culmination of your century of work. Yuki didn't get arrogant just because he had participated in the final step. This was Setsuno's creation, he had only given her a nudge in the right direction. Actually, with his current culinary skills, completing the century soup wouldn't be that difficult. But there was no need to do so now that Setsuno had already done it. People only remember the first, not the second. Thanks to Setsuno, Yuki wasn't short on money, so why bother? Of course, making it for himself or his friends was another matter entirely. The last time I had this soup was a century ago. Since Yuki had played a part in completing the soup, Setsuno had insisted on waiting for his return before anyone could taste it. That's why Jiro and the others hadn't had any for the past week. The soup hadn't been released for sale yet either. Setsuno had already made plans, after everyone had tasted it, she would naturally put it on the market. This news had also been spread through her company, so not many people dared to camp outside her door trying to interview her. It's just like it was 100 years ago. You can hardly see the soup in the bowl with the naked eye. As the head of the IGO, President Ichiria had naturally had the century soup before. The IGO would never pass up such a dish, and with their capabilities, they had managed to capture a portion of it. So, Ichiria had tasted it. The rest had been given to the members of 0th Biotope. After all, there were only few people who could enter the gourmet world. The stronger they were, the better. The century soup was effective even on the gourmet cells of the three great powers, Ichiryu, Jiro, Midora. Let alone others. After drinking it, the other's strength had also increased significantly. This was why the IGO currently had no century soup. And the powerhouses who could enter the gourmet world now were either not yet born 100 years ago or had only just qualified to enter. Ichiria had given all the century soup he had to them, without any thought of saving some for himself. After all, who could have predicted he would raise talents like the four heavenly kings? The IGO had existed for so many years, and the ones he cared about most were the four heavenly kings. That deliciousness. I still can't forget it to this day. And this century soup has an intoxicating effect, which is quite nice. For a drinker like Jiro, the century soup could also be enjoyed like wine. After all, it did have an alcoholic effect. Once immersed in its deliciousness, one's behavior would become like that of a drunkard. And most critically, that incredibly pervy smiling face. To be honest, Yuki would never let his expression become like that. As long as one was mentally prepared, they wouldn't smile like that. The house-building guy from the original story was a perfect example. Even the century soup could only make his lips curl up slightly into a tiny smile. After they spoke, everyone began to savor the century soup. Its deliciousness quickly immersed them. Yuki was no exception. He had tasted the semi-finished soup before, and it was already incredibly delicious. But now, all the ingredients had been perfectly fused, creating a dish with a completely seamless flavor. As he drank the century soup, Yuki's body began to expand. His gourmet cells had activated. It wasn't just him, Nono was the same. However, compared to men, a woman's cell activation made her body more toned and defined, not muscular. This was why there were almost no muscle women in the original story. The gourmet cells had different effects depending on gender. A man's muscles would swell explosively. Even Yuki was no exception. But he could compress these expanded muscles. Although his actual weight wouldn't change, at least he wouldn't look like a muscle monster. Cell activation. The others noticed the changes in Yuki and Nono. They had experienced cell activation many times, so they recognized the state at a glance. They didn't disturb them, simply watching as they powered up. Chapter 135, President Ichirio's Invitation, a New Fishing Hall. As the cell activation subsided, the swollen muscles on Yuki's body began to recede. Soon, his physique returned to its original state, and his aura was instantly drawn back within him. Not only has he mastered food honor, but he's even trained his Enbu to a certain level, at his age. It's unbelievable. Watching Yuki's display, even Ichirio was astonished. He had seen geniuses before. The 4 heavenly kings he had raised were prime examples. To allow for their proper growth, Ichirio had deliberately refrained from using the IGO's vast resources on them. When Toriko first appeared in the original story, his cell level was likely only in the teens and incredibly low level. But because his fundamentals were so solid, his and the others' growth rates later skyrocketed. This was Ichirio's goal. He saw their potential and had them build a strong foundation, allowing them to develop on their own. The results proved he was successful. With Yuki's current cell level, Ichirio could easily mass-produce individuals of similar strength. The difference was, Yuki had no powerful backer before this, he had raised his cell level entirely on his own. Then there was food honor and Enbu. There were no shortcuts for those two, even Toriko and Komatsu were no exception. They mastered food honor quickly only because they possessed an innate and profound gratitude for ingredients. This gratitude made them perfectly suited for the food honor of the Food Honor Temple. Had it been any other version, their progress would have been much slower. Their time at the temple was spent learning how to channel their existing gratitude to master the technique. It could be said that both of them already had the potential to master food honor from the start. All they had to do was convert it. The other people at the Food Honor Temple were the classic example of the difficulty. Even after decades of training, they remained mere vice masters. Take Kairu, one of the top-ranked chefs. While that ranking was a bit inflated, the chefs at the top were genuinely strong. Kairu was no exception. After Granny Chio left, she single-handedly supported the disappearing cuisine restaurant, preventing it from dropping its 10-star rating. That alone was proof of her considerable skill, but in Chinchin's eyes, she was still not worthy of recognition because he knew she had not mastered food honor. People like the 4 heavenly kings and Komatsu were the exceptions. Everyone else truly demonstrated how difficult mastering food honor was. Ichirio knew this well. Yuki was only a teenager, yet at his age, he had already reached a masterful level of food honor, learned food immersion, and even studied Enbu. This series of accomplishments left even Ichirio wide-eyed. A high cell level could be brute-forced with enough ingredients, but the comprehension of food honor and Enbu could not. It is indeed unbelievable. His growth rate is absolutely beyond your imagination. As someone who had taught Yuki, even if only for a short time, Jiro knew just how unreal Yuki's talent was. Not only was his comprehension off the charts, but his cell's ability to adapt and recover was also on another level. This feeling. It's amazing. Yuki savored the terrifying power coursing through him. The sensation of cell activation was truly incredible. It was just a shame that triggering it wasn't so easy. Your cell level has risen considerably, and the degree of improvement is also quite strange. But it's a good thing. With this boost, even though your cell level isn't 100 yet, your actual strength is enough for you to enter the gourmet world. Setsuno said with a smile. She was well aware that Yuki's combat power far exceeded his cell level. Now, after this increase, he could be considered a powerhouse capable of entering the gourmet world. I think I'll pass for now. I know my own limits. While I might be qualified to enter the gourmet world, the consequences of going in now wouldn't be pretty. Yuki shook his head. According to the rules of the human world, one could enter the gourmet world after reaching level 100. This was set for 2 reasons. 1. The dividing line between the human and gourmet worlds was indeed level 100. Aside from a few special areas, no creatures above capture level 100 would appear in the human world. 2. Once one's cell level broke 100, it was nearly impossible to continue improving with ingredients from the human world, necessitating a trip to the gourmet world. Others who didn't know the depths of the gourmet world would rush in as soon as they reached that level. Toriko was a prime example. Ichirio probably never imagined that Toriko would be so bullheaded, daring to run off to the gourmet world so early. With no intelligence and an insufficient cell level, Toriko just charged right in. Yuki had no idea where he got that confidence. Yuki, however, knew just how terrifying the gourmet world was. He would absolutely not enter without being certain of his chances. You're right. Many people head straight for the gourmet world once their cell level is high enough. Some even go before they're ready. This results in a situation where entering the gourmet world is almost a death sentence. Now that your strength is up to par, I would like to invite you to join Biotope 0th. Ichiria suddenly said. Biotope 0th? Yuki knew what Biotope 0th was, of course, but he feigned ignorance. You should know that the IGO has established multiple ecological areas. Beyond those, there is Biotope 0th, but it's located within the gourmet world. Only members with a combat power of level 100 or higher can enter. Ichiryu explained simply. I see. And what would I have to give to join Biotope 0th? What would I get in return? Yuki continued his inquiry. This was something he really didn't know much about. In the original story, Biotope 0th only appeared once for a meeting before heading off to a decisive battle with the Gourmet Corp. What you get is protection. Biotope 0th was established to increase the survival rate of new members. The gourmet world is a land of opportunity, but it's also a land of crisis. Surviving in the gourmet world is no easy task. Biotope 0th was created to escort newcomers. As for what you have to give, members of Biotope 0th don't need to contribute to the IGO. They need to contribute to the human world. When necessary, you must stand at the forefront. As he said this, Ichirio's expression turned serious. Since Biotope 0th provided help, those who benefited from it naturally had to give something back. Ichiria didn't need them to give him anything, but they had to contribute to the human world. In times of crisis, the members of Biotope 0th had to be the first line of defense. Hearing Ichirio's description, Yuki understood. This man had no personal desires. He hadn't formed Biotope 0th to build his own power base. He did it for the newcomers, and for the entire human world. He hoped these people could become pillars of the human world, just like him. Yuki considered it for a moment, then made his decision. I think I'll pass. I'm not at that level yet. Yuki refused. On one hand, the benefits of Biotope 0th were of little use to him. He had many methods at his disposal and knew the risks of the gourmet world. He would only enter when he was confident. With enough caution, he wouldn't need Biotope 0th's help. On the other hand, he wasn't as virtuous as Ichiryu. While he might step in if the human world was in trouble, he would never put his life on the line for it. Yuki was a person with selfish desires, he couldn't be like Ichiryu. In fact, the vast majority of people in Biotope 0th were the same. But because they had joined and enjoyed the conveniences provided, they had to obey Ichiria's commands. Moreover, the people who joined Biotope 0th were all of good character. Ichirio only invited those he deemed worthy. He had invited Yuki directly because of Setsuno and Jiro. Their glowing recommendations made him trust that they wouldn't be wrong about him. I see. That's a shame. However, the gates of Biotope 0th will always be open for you. You can join whenever you wish, Ichiria said with a smile. Yuki's refusal was fine by him. He wasn't like some brainless villain who would try to kill someone for not joining their organization. Thank you, President Ichiryu. Yuki nodded. He had refused so bluntly because he knew Ichiria's character. If it had been someone he didn't know, Yuki would have stalled for time. After all, if he refused an unfamiliar party, he couldn't be sure they wouldn't try to cause trouble. Stalling was the best option in that case. As they were talking, Nono's transformation also returned to normal. Her figure was now even more toned and defined. Unfortunately, gourmet cells didn't have a height-increasing effect, so she was still a bit short. After they finished eating, President Ichiria left. He had many things to attend to. After all, the IGO had hundreds of member nations and many major issues required his oversight. It was a good thing his strength had peaked many years ago. Otherwise, spending so much time on work would have led to a situation like Jindojima's in Food Wars, a waste of his talent. After Ichiria left, Jiro also departed. He had to go find some wine. Setsuno was long used to it. Yuki, however, remained to continue his studies. Nono also stayed to learn with him. Although studying alongside Yuki was demoralizing, she converted that pressure into motivation. It had to be said, she was worthy of being someone Setsuno favored. Nono's potential and character were both top-notch. Given enough time, she could definitely grow to Setsuno's level. The next morning, the news about the Century Soup was officially announced. The company under Setsuno began to sell it. For her, making the Century Soup was now a simple matter. And when it was announced, Setsuno had Yuki's name printed in the creators section as well. Yuki knew she was building up his reputation. The conditions for entering the official chef rankings were not simple. One needed sufficient contributions. Komatsu was able to join because he made the Century Soup, simplified the medicinal mochi recipe, and discovered Moore's oil. Of course, you could also be like Otaki and use money to pave the way. As long as your culinary skills were high enough, you could bypass the need to accumulate contributions. Unfortunately for the Otaki of the original story, he was captured by the Gourmet Corp not long after making the list. But it was a blessing in disguise, as he awakened his gourmet cells because of it. Otherwise, if Otaki had continued on his original path, he would have been nowhere to be seen when it was time to cook God. Setsuno was building up Yuki's reputation in the hopes that he could also make it onto the list. While the list was somewhat inflated, anyone who was anyone in the culinary world was on it. So, despite the inflation, it still held considerable weight. The outside world was rife with speculation about Yuki, this figure who had appeared out of nowhere. But since Yuki didn't exist in this world before, he had left no traces. And now, he was always at Setsuno's diner, so the outside world knew next to nothing about him. This baffled them, and they started calling him the mysterious man. There was nothing for it. To the outside world, Yuki was indeed a great mystery. Yuki himself paid no mind to any of this. He continued to learn, not only from Setsuno but also from Jiro. During this time, he also ate the tundra dragon meat. It tasted good and raised his cell level a little, but unfortunately, the tundra dragon wasn't a special ingredient, so while his level increased, his cells didn't activate. Just like that, Yuki spent a full month there and then received a new large bait. Yuki was very curious about what the large bait could catch now. As the large bait was consumed, a ball of light was soon pulled from the water. Chapter 136, Journey to Milk Mountain, the second generation milk. An ingredient with a capture level of over 70, and there are thousands of tons of it. Looking at the ingredient he had pulled out, Yuki was a bit stunned. The old large bait could never catch something like this. It was usually just special abilities and techniques from the world of Cooking Master Boy. But now, it had actually caught an ingredient with a capture level over 70, and in such a massive quantity. If he ate all of it, Yuki estimated his cell level could rise by another level or two. Being able to raise his level, even if only by 1 or 2, was a great boon. Mr. Yuki, Master is looking for you. One day, while Yuki was studying, Nono came to find him. Alright, I understand. Thanks, Nono. Yuki nodded. After thanking her for the message, he went to find Setsuno. You're here. Have a seat. I called you here about your exclusive kitchen knife. Setsuno said as soon as Yuki arrived. My exclusive knife? Have you heard back from the second generation milk? Hearing this, Yuki's spirits lifted. That's right, I've already contacted her. But there's a bit of a problem. She agreed to forge a knife for you, and she'll even let you cut the line, but she doesn't want you to go see her. That little girl seems to have some issues. She is, after all, that fellow Milk's daughter, so I was hoping you could take a trip and see what's going on. You're heading to the heavy hole to train your Enbu anyway, so you can check on her on the way. Setsuno was very concerned about the second generation Milk. After all, Milk 2 had inherited the first generation skills and had done an excellent job. As chefs, their relationships with knifesmiths were naturally very close. Setsuno and the first generation Milk were like that. She had learned from him about his daughter. Though adopted, the first generation Milk truly treated her as his own. He later taught her all his skills, and she didn't disappoint him. Her talent as a sharpener surpassed even his. After the first generation Milk took Ichirio's commission, he handed his work over to his daughter. Though Setsuno hadn't seen Milk 2 in years, the quality of the work she produced was in no way inferior to her father's. But this time, Setsuno sensed a problem. When she proposed that Yuki visit in person, Milk 2 was extremely resistant. This resistance surprised Setsuno. Not wanting her old friend's daughter to get into trouble, she wanted to ask Yuki to make the trip. She knew her old friend was forging a knife in the heavy hole. But she also knew he was a workaholic. Until his work was done, he wouldn't return, even if he was right at his doorstep. I see. I'll do it. Yuki immediately nodded. It was a joke to think he would refuse. He knew exactly what Milk 2's problem was. So, he naturally had to accept this commission. After all, once he solved her problem, she would surely bring out the fossilized Fang of the Dragon King to forge a knife for him. Such a material was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Yuki certainly couldn't produce a material like that himself right now, so a trip was well worth it. And just as Setsuno said, the heavy hole was a place he had to go anyway. The intense gravity there would be a great aid for training his Enbu. There was also an ingredient he wanted at the bottom of the heavy hole, the milk stardust. The milk stardust was a super-grade whetstone discovered by the first generation Milk. Even in the gourmet world, you couldn't find a better one, and as the milk stardust was used for sharpening, it would gradually be ground into a powder. This powder was an ingredient itself, also known as the all-purpose seasoning. Sprinkled on different ingredients, it would produce different flavors, always perfectly complementing the ingredient. Yuki naturally wouldn't pass up such an ingredient. With so many objectives, a trip to Milk Mountain was a must. He was also interested in Milk's sharpening techniques and hoped to learn a thing or two. Since you agree, take this letter. Setsuno handed a letter to Yuki. Also, consider this a commission. When you complete it, I'll provide you with some golden wheat. Setsuno said with a smile. Since it was a commission, there had to be a reward. The reward she offered was golden wheat. Thank you very much. Yuki smiled back. The commission and reward were really just symbolic. Golden wheat wasn't particularly rare, you could get as much as you wanted from a small island overseas. While the noodles made from golden wheat were an excellent ingredient, few people would bother with it. The reason was simple: the difficulty of turning golden wheat into noodles was on par with preparing the soap bubble fruit. The soap bubble fruit was a treasure of the food honor temple. Just capturing it was extremely difficult, and to cook it, one had to have mastered food honor. Otherwise, it was impossible. How many people in this world could master food honor? Very few could make those noodles. And an ingredient like golden wheat wasn't rare. Setsuno had even managed to mass produce it. So, her offering it to Yuki was purely symbolic. After leaving Setsuno's, Yuki went directly to the IGO branch in Gourmet Town. Although he hadn't joined Biotope 0th, thanks to Setsuno and Jiro, his authority within the IGO was not low. So he went straight to the branch and arranged for a plane to take him near Milk Mountain. He could have flown there himself, but there was no need. Once he found a suitable camping monster, he wouldn't have to worry about such things. Yuki-sama, we are approaching Milk Mountain. The mountain is not within the safe zone, so it would be very risky for the aircraft to enter. I can only take you this far. After some time, the pilot's voice came through. Although this was the human world, it didn't mean humans could just wander anywhere. Transportation could only enter marked safe zones, otherwise, they risked being destroyed. So, the pilot could only bring him here. I understand. Thank you for your trouble this time, Yuki said with a grateful smile. Although it was the pilot's job, a word of thanks cost nothing. Not at all, Yuki-sama. The pilot was a bit stunned by the thanks. He was just doing his job, and he rarely received thanks, especially from a big shot like Yuki. It was quite flattering. Seeing his reaction, Yuki just smiled and opened the cabin door. It had to be said, the technology in the world of Toriko was indeed very advanced. The plane was hovering in mid-air, completely stationary. Yuki opened the door and flew out directly. You can head back now. Flying around to the front of the plane, Yuki waved to the pilot, then flew off towards Milk Mountain. He can fly. What an incredible person. Watching Yuki fly away, the pilot was dumbfounded. The people in the world of Toriko were strong, but very few could fly. Of course, for the people of this world, achieving something similar to flight was simple. In the later stages, with their physical abilities, flying by kicking off the air was easy. Then there were calories. The calorie techniques they used could allow them to float in mid-air. If they stood on them, they could achieve a different kind of flight. Shin Shinshin's method of using the recoil from his spoon to fly was also quite effective. But those were things only the strong could do. It was rare for IGO employees like him to come into contact with such powerhouses. So, seeing Yuki fly, he was naturally very shocked. After snapping out of it, the pilot returned to base, his face still full of shock. As for Yuki, he didn't land but flew directly towards the summit of Milk Mountain. Milk Mountain was at a high altitude, and most critically, the only path up was a flight of over 20,000 massive steps, each about 1.5 meters high. In the original story, Komatsu had to use his hands and feet to climb, using all his strength just to pull himself up. It was a good thing his stamina was decent, and Toriko helped him later. Otherwise, reaching the summit of Milk Mountain would have been nearly impossible. The reason the steps were so large was because of the first-generation milk size. He was over 3 meters tall, so steps of this size weren't a big deal for him. Of course, the steps weren't the most difficult part of climbing Milk Mountain. If you had enough time and supplies, reaching the summit wasn't a problem. The most crucial point about climbing Milk Mountain was the numerous beasts on the mountain. Their strength wasn't weak, a normal person coming here would be pure cannon fodder. That was the biggest difficulty in climbing the mountain. Yuki naturally wasn't foolish enough to climb the stairs. It wasn't a mandatory requirement, so he just flew over. Though he encountered some flying birds, sky scum, in mid-air, which attacked him, his hair directly used knocking to kill them as they got close. While the capture level of these sky scum wasn't high, they tasted very good. Yuki had never eaten them before, only seen them in the gourmet encyclopedia, so he naturally wouldn't let them go. After harvesting a batch of sky scum, Yuki soon arrived at the summit. There was only a single, massive house on top, with a hot spring and other facilities outside. As Yuki approached, a strange-looking creature let out a cry, watching him warily. This creature was a vampire Kong, which had been around since the time of the first-generation milk. After he left, the vampire Kong had stayed with the second-generation milk. It was usually responsible for delivering the various knives. Milk 2 rarely left the mountain. On one hand, there was a lot of work to do, leaving her little time to go down and have fun. On the other, she needed to hide her identity. After all, the current Milk 2 still believed she was impersonating her father. Who are you? Why are you here? With the vampire Kong's warning, a figure soon rushed out, their gaze fixed on Yuki. The newcomer looked like a handsome man with a heroic air. A scar on the side of his face, while slightly marring his beauty, also added a different kind of charm. This person was the second-generation Milk. Though she looked like a dashing young man, Yuki knew very well that she was a woman. In fact, Milk 2 was very beautiful. In Toriko, female characters weren't described in great detail, and there were very few beautiful ones. Milk 2 was one of them, but she was currently disguised as a man. My name is Yuki. Granny Setsuno sent me. This is her letter of introduction. Yuki directly presented the letter. Hearing that he was sent by Granny Setsuno, and remembering her previous contact, Milk 2's wariness lessened somewhat, but it didn't disappear completely. After all, until she had seen the contents of the letter, she couldn't be completely sure if Yuki was friend or foe. After taking the letter and reading it, she finally confirmed that Yuki had indeed been sent by Granny Setsuno. The letter is real. I can't believe Granny Setsuno still sent you. I already refused. Milk 2 had a headache. To hide her identity, she naturally wouldn't let anyone come here rashly. That's why she had agreed to forge the knife but refused to let Yuki come over. But now, Yuki was here anyway. Granny Setsuno could tell you seem to have a problem. She said that since you're the first-generation Milk's daughter, you're also her junior. She couldn't just turn a blind eye when she noticed something was wrong. Yuki said with a smile. His words, however, left Milk 2 completely stunned. Seeing her reaction, Yuki was very satisfied. He knew just how much information that one sentence contained. At this stage, Milk 2 still thought she was hiding it well, that the outside world believed it was the first-generation Milk doing all this work. But Yuki's words directly told her that her identity had been known to Setsuno and the others for a long time. Her long-hidden identity, exposed so directly, Milk 2 was naturally dumbfounded. At this moment, her mind went completely blank, unable to think at all. Chapter 137, The Second-Generation Milk's Commission, Destination, Heavy Hole. You. And Granny Setsuno, how did you know? The second-generation Milk finally managed to collect herself, but even then, she could barely get the words out. Know what? Yuki knew exactly what she was asking, but he prompted her anyway. That I secretly took over for my master and claimed to be Milk to the outside world. Milk 2 dropped the act. In her mind, if Yuki and Setsuno already knew, there was no point in hiding it any longer. In truth, she had been on edge this entire time, serving as Milk. On one hand, she was terrified her skills weren't good enough and that she would tarnish the Milk name. On the other, she was afraid her master would be furious when he returned and found she had taken over his work. The psychological pressure on her these past few years had been immense. What are you talking about? Aren't you the second-generation Milk? So what do you mean by secretly? Yuki's words left Milk 2 even more dumbfounded. She felt as if they weren't even on the same page. After a moment, Milk 2 led Yuki back into her house, poured him some tea, and, bit by bit, told him the story of her and the first-generation Milk. I see. So this is all just a big misunderstanding. Granny Setsuno and the first-generation Milk are good friends. She learned about you from him, and he even told her that you had already become the second-generation Milk. In other words, for whatever reason, he never told you about this, which led you to mistakenly believe you were just filling in for him. The truth is, he acknowledged that you were ready to graduate long ago. Yuki laid out everything he knew for her. What? Master already acknowledged me? He actively handed the work of milk over to me? Hearing this, Milk 2's face was a mask of disbelief. Why are you so shocked? Think about it. How long have you been doing the work of milk? If I remember correctly, the first generation milk received that big commission several years ago. If your skills weren't up to par, if you hadn't earned his recognition, how could you possibly have held this position for so long? Yuki rolled his eyes. This is what happens when people get trapped in self-doubt, they can't see the situation clearly. That was Milk 2's problem. If she hadn't been so consumed by her own insecurities, she would have seen the truth of the matter long ago. It was because she was caught in that spiral, never daring to even consider the possibility, that she remained blind to it. Even if you say that. Master didn't leave any message when he left. He just disappeared. If he really approved of me, he shouldn't have done it like that. Milk 2 wasn't entirely convinced. The fact that her master had never told her himself had always been a knot in her heart. Well, you can just ask him yourself. Granny Setsuno said he's been at the bottom of the heavy hole this whole time, forging a knife. Yuki shrugged. If she didn't believe him, she could get the answer from the source. What? Master is in the heavy hole? That's right, the milk stardust is there. If he took on a commission, it's highly likely he'd be there. I wonder what kind of commission he took on that would keep him in the heavy hole for so long. Knowing her master was at the bottom of the heavy hole surprised Milk 2 at first, but it quickly made sense. It only made her more curious about the nature of his work. She knew his forging and sharpening skills inside and out. For a commission to take him this long to complete, it must be incredibly difficult. Even if you say that, I would have gone to the heavy hole long ago if I had the ability. My gourmet cell level isn't high, I can't compare to master. The materials I'd used for forging and sharpening all these years have mostly been provided by the chefs themselves. Only when I have no other choice do I use the high-level materials master left behind. The heavy hole has intense gravity, and it's filled with hordes of powerful beasts. I can't handle any of that. So even if I knew master was in there, I couldn't go and ask him myself. Milk 2 shook her head, hating her own weakness. Yuki secretly nodded. Compared to her father, Milk 2 was indeed quite weak. The first-generation Milk was a powerhouse capable of entering the gourmet world, a member of Biotope 0th. But Milk 2? She could handle beasts in the capture level 20 to 30 range, but a capture level 40 or 50 beast would be too much for her. It was a good thing the beasts around Milk Mountain weren't high level, otherwise, she would have trouble just protecting herself. I have some business in the heavy hole. I can take a letter down for you. Yuki offered. Milk 2's eyes lit up. Could you really? She asked again, her voice full of hope. Of course. But I have a condition. I'll bring a letter down for you and bring back some milk stardust. In return, you have to forge a knife for me with everything you've got. Yuki didn't specify the best materials or the fossilized fawn of the Dragon King. He knew that if he helped her, she would offer them herself. No problem. I agree. Milk 2 accepted without a moment's hesitation. In that case, wait for my good news. With that, Yuki didn't linger any longer and flew directly towards the heavy hole. He can fly. The sight of Yuki taking flight was another huge shock for Milk 2. He had also flown when he first arrived, but only the vampire Kong had seen it. By the time she had rushed out, he had already landed. She had assumed he'd climbed the stairs. She never imagined he could actually fly. She had never seen a human who could fly, or even heard of one. The heavy hole was close to Milk Mountain, and Yuki found it quickly. But as he approached, he realized something was wrong. This gravity, it's not what the original story described. Just at the entrance, it's already over 10 times normal gravity. Yuki was surprised as he felt the immense pressure. In the original story, even at the bottom of the pit, the gravity hadn't reached 10 times normal when Toriko was there. Honestly, that part of the plot had always been problematic. The Toriko who went to Milk Mountain had already been to the gourmet world once. Though he came back battered and had to be rescued, he was by no means weak. For a powerhouse of that level to be so affected by less than 10 gs of gravity seemed off. Yuki guessed the original author had written it from a normal person's perspective, otherwise Toriko wouldn't have struggled so much. But this heavy hole was different. If it was over 10 gs at the entrance, what about the bottom? Yuki suspected the gravity at the bottom might exceed 100 times normal, even more intense than the gravity on the 100G mountain created by the Monkey King. At that moment, Yuki noticed that the gravity acting on his body was completely different from the external gravity. The pressure outside was over 10 gs, but what he felt was less than 2. Is it because of Enbu? That's right, even when not actively used, Enbu can passively disperse force. Yuki understood that his mastered skill was at work. Enbu itself could negate the vast majority of forces, and gravity was no exception. It was a pity his mastery of Enbu wasn't at its peak, so he couldn't completely negate all the gravity even at the entrance. But this place was definitely a perfect training ground for Enbu. His body was under constant pressure, and his Enbu was constantly active. Practice was the most important part of mastering anything, and Enbu was no different. Feeling the external pressure, Yuki leaped straight down. As he descended, the gravity steadily increased. After a few thousand meters, he found the gravity was approaching 50 times normal. Even though Enbu could only disperse a portion of it, Yuki had mastered food honor, so he adapted to the new gravity within a few breaths. If a person who hadn't adapted to such gravity were to enter this environment rashly, their combat power would be severely diminished. Even if their body could withstand the pressure, their techniques and speed would be affected by the gravity. Without rapid adaptation, they would be lucky to retain half of their combat strength. Yuki, however, could quickly adapt to such an environment. Even if his speed and movements were affected, he could adjust to an optimal state in an extremely short amount of time. In other words, his combat power wouldn't be significantly impacted. He wouldn't be like Toriko on his first visit, who was nearly injured by a balbamoth because the gravity affected him. The moment Yuki adapted to the surrounding gravity, a number of strange-looking monsters emerged from the surrounding caves. They were balbamoth, with a capture level of 44. But in this high-gravity environment, if a gourmet hunter of the same level came in, they would most likely lose in a one-on-one fight. After all, the balbamoth had lived in this environment since birth and were long adapted to the gravity. An outsider whose combat power was reduced by the environment would be at a great disadvantage. What's more, the balbamoth were a species that moved in swarms. They wouldn't play fair and fight you one-on-one. Even if you were a higher level, it would be difficult to survive against a swarm. Especially in a situation like this, one might panic and flee downwards. Running into an area of even greater gravity without adapting first would be fatal. Of course, that applied to others. Yuki's combat power was not affected by the gravity here. So these balbamoth posed no threat to him. In fact, his gourmet cell level was so high that in the face of these creatures, a massive aura was released from his body. Against a swarm of beasts far weaker than himself, intimidation was the best choice. A colossal presence surged forth. The balbamoth, affected by this aura, their snake-like pupils shrank, and their massive bodies began to retreat. Even in a pack, faced with a power they couldn't possibly resist, they could only choose to flee. At the same time, Yuki's presence reached the bottom of the heavy hole. Someone has come to the heavy hole? This aura is unfamiliar. The first-generation Milk, who was working, sensed the presence and put down his tools. While he knew this presence couldn't threaten him, it was undoubtedly over level 100 in strength, so he couldn't just ignore it. Putting down his work, he walked out of his workshop and had his scorpion cattle stay behind. He knew the scorpion cattle was no match for the owner of this aura, so he certainly wouldn't let it go to its death. Up above, seeing the balbamoth retreat after being intimidated by his presence, Yuki paid them no more mind. Balbamoth meat wasn't particularly tasty, so he had no intention of capturing them. Just like that, Yuki descended rapidly. At a depth of 10,000 meters, the gravity had already exceeded 100 times normal. Good grief! The gravity here is already over 100 gs. A weaker person coming here would probably be crushed instantly. Yuki noted that this heavy hole was far more dangerous than the one in the original story. Based on the current beasts and gravity, even a level 70 powerhouse would be at considerable risk. Glancing around, Yuki soon found a group of jewel crabs. These were the same ruby crabs that Toriko had found. But ruby crabs were just one branch of the species. There were many different colors of jewel crabs. The different colors had different tastes and textures. Yuki wasn't about to let these crabs go. Any ingredient that could live under such immense gravity was no ordinary ingredient. After collecting some jewel crabs, Yuki continued his descent. This time, he went all the way to the deepest part of the cave. Before he even reached the bottom, he smelled a foul odor. As he got closer, he found that there were numerous animal carcasses here. Chapter 138, The First Generation Milks Gratitude, More Dragon King Fangs. These carcasses must be from creatures that accidentally fell from above. Yuki mused, looking at the massive pile of remains. Some had long since turned to bone, while others were in a state of advanced decay. A large number of beasts lived near the heavy hole. There were always some who, unaware of the danger, got too close. The lucky ones might escape with their lives, but the unlucky ones would fall directly to the bottom. From a height of dozens of kilometers, coupled with the terrifying gravity, many animals were instantly pulverized upon impact. That's why the ground here was littered with corpses. Yuki didn't linger and moved on. However, not long after he left, he encountered a familiar yet strange figure. It was the first generation Milk, a being like a giant. He was dressed like a primitive man, his body covered in scars. These weren't from battle, but from forging knives. The most prominent feature of a milk knife was its sharpness. A finished milk knife, if not handled carefully, could fall and cut through the air, causing damage within a certain range. That was how the first generation Milk got his scars. The scars on Milk 2's face had a similar origin. When she was a child, she had been curiously watching him sharpen a blade. Seeing his daughter so interested, he hadn't stopped her. But a knife on the rack wasn't secured properly. It fell, plunging into the floor and leaving 2 scars on her face. Yuki clearly saw the first generation Milk emerge, his lips moving, but his voice was so quiet that Yuki couldn't hear what he was saying. No wonder so many people in the original story couldn't hear what this guy was saying. Even I can't hear him. Yuki's eye twitched. In the original story, even powerhouses who could enter the gourmet world had trouble hearing him. But Yuki had another method. He took out a pen and paper and wrote, "I can't hear what you're saying," and handed it to him. The first generation Milk looked down at the paper and didn't seem surprised. Over the years, plenty of people couldn't hear him speak. He didn't have an amplifier stone on him, so he simply wrote a sentence back, telling Yuki to follow him. Yuki nodded, and Milk led the way. After walking for a while, they arrived at a cave. This cave was his workshop. Inside were a large number of finished knives, but their sizes were staggering. Almost every one was around 10 meters long. Their shapes were also incredibly strange. If you didn't know better, you'd never guess they were kitchen knives. Back in the workshop, Milk rummaged around for a moment and found a stone. It was an amplifier stone, taken from a certain type of bird, which could amplify sound. "Can you hear me now?" As he held up the amplifier stone, Yuki could finally hear what he was saying. Even with the stone, Milk's voice was still very soft. If a normal person were here, a moment's lapse in concentration and they would miss what he said. "I can hear you." Yuki nodded. He had to admire the man. How did he manage to suppress his voice to such a low volume, and more importantly, still produce a sound, albeit a tiny one? "Good that you can hear me. Now, tell me, who are you? And why are you here?" Milk needed to know who Yuki was and what his purpose was. He had been here forging a knife ever since he received the commission from President Ichiryu. This knife was of utmost importance. With a powerful stranger suddenly appearing, he couldn't just ignore it. My name is Yuki. I'm also with the IGO, in a sense. I came here this time too. Yuki explained everything, that he came to have Milk 2 forge a knife, Setsuno's commission, and Milk 2's confusion. After he finished, Milk Eye's expressionless face instantly crumbled, and he fell to the ground in an exaggerated pose. She never heard me? So it was my mistake that caused her so much confusion all this time, but even so, she still took on my work. At this moment, Milk Eye was both moved and filled with guilt. You should know how quiet your own voice is. An increase in gourmet cell level enhances the five senses to some extent, but even I can't hear what you're saying. You expect your daughter to hear you? But even though she was confused, I have to say, her craftsmanship is in no way inferior to yours. In the time you've been gone, all the work has proceeded smoothly. The outside world has no idea that the milk knives of these past few years were made by the second generation milk. I came here this time to get a letter from you. Write a letter to your daughter. Clear things up. Of course, if you can, it would be best to go back and explain it to her in person. Yuki suggested that he could easily make a round trip. A day would be more than enough to go back and return to his work. It was only because Milk 2 didn't know he was here and didn't have the ability to descend into the pit, otherwise, she would have come looking for him long ago. I can write a letter. But going back. I'm at a critical stage right now. I'm afraid if I go back, I'll keep thinking about her. It's better to wait until the work is done. As he spoke, a smile appeared on Milk Eye's lips. Though he really wanted to see how his daughter had grown, he was afraid that if he went back, he wouldn't want to return, or that he would keep thinking about her. He had to finish his work first. This commission was incredibly important. It was for an ingredient from Acacia's full course menu. This knife was the key to preparing air, so it had to be finished before the ingredient matured. In that case, just write a letter. Otherwise, I can't complete my end of the deal. She promised to forge an exclusive knife for me if I brought back a letter from you. Yuki didn't hide his deal with Milk 2. It was nothing to be ashamed of. Hearing this, Milk Eye gave Yuki a surprised look. He hadn't expected Yuki to be so direct. If Yuki hadn't said it, it would have been like he was just helping out and Milk would have been even more grateful. But by saying it, it turned from help into a transaction. Naturally, his gratitude would be somewhat diminished. That was why he was so surprised by Yuki's frankness. But it also proved one thing: Yuki was a trustworthy person. He didn't hide his intentions. Milk quite liked that kind of character. Soon, Milk finished writing the letter and handed it to Yuki. By the way, Master Milk, I also came here to get some milk stardust. Could you tell me where it is? Yuki asked. Although he could find it quickly on his own. The milk stardust were glowing golden crystals, easy to spot in a place like this. I'll take you there. Also, please help me take these things back. With that, Milk Eye brought out a massive box, 3 meters long, 2 meters wide, and 1 meter high, and handed it to Yuki. What's this? Yuki looked at him curiously. This is the fossilized fawn of the Dragon King that I collected back then. Now that my work is almost done, I don't need the extra fossils. Please take them back for me. You can also choose the material for your knife from here. Although there's a piece at home, it's too small. If you want a slightly larger knife, that fossil won't be enough. Milk explained. Hearing this, Yuki understood. These fossilized Dragon King fangs were a form of payment from him. Although according to their deal, Milk 2 was already paying the price, as a father, he couldn't let his daughter bear the cost. And in his view, these fossils would also be a great help in improving Milk 2's skills. Thank you very much, Master Milk. Yuki said his thanks. The two then came to a crystal vein that glowed with a golden light. It was covered in a large number of glowing golden crystals. Without a doubt, this was the milk stardust. When Milk Eye first discovered this place, he determined that this environment was highly likely to produce the whetstone he needed. So he explored this area and eventually found the strongest whetstone, the milk stardust. Looking at the crystals before him, Yuki swiped his hand, and a large number of the golden crystals were instantly severed. His hair lifted all the crystals up. Oh, your ability is quite similar to a boy from the IGO. That kid also likes to use his hair to pick things up. Seeing this, Milk was reminded of when he had seen Sunny. Ichiria had adopted 4 children and had put his heart and soul into raising them. It would be a lie to say the members of Biotope 0th weren't curious. So, Milk had met them when they were young and knew what Sunny's ability was. It had to be said, Sunny's ability was indeed very useful at times. At least, picking things up was much more effortless for him than for others. I'll be heading back now, Master Milk. After I deliver the things, I'll come back again. I'll bring you Milk 2's reply then. Having gotten what he needed, Yuki planned to head back first. The gravity here was perfect for training Enbu, so he certainly wouldn't just leave and not return. He planned to deliver the things first, let Milk 2 start on his knife, so he wouldn't have to wait when it was time for him to leave. You're coming back to the heavy hole? Why? Milk asked, confused. He didn't understand why Yuki would return. The most valuable thing here was the milk stardust. As for other ingredients, there weren't many precious ones. So he was puzzled as to why Yuki would come back. I've learned Enbu. In this high-gravity environment, it's the best place to improve it. Yuki stated his purpose directly. Enbu? You've even learned Enbu? What an impressive young man! Milk had naturally noticed that Yuki wasn't old, but his strength was truly terrifying, especially since he had also mastered Enbu. And from his earlier movements, Yuki's food honor was definitely at the master level. After realizing this, Milk showed the same expression as Ichiria had. Yuki's monstrous talent left him stunned. Alright, I'm leaving now, Master Milk. If all goes well, I'll be back soon. With that, Yuki began to climb up with the materials. He didn't put the things into his storage space in front of Milk, doing so would expose his space. So he used his hair to carry the things out of the bottom of the heavy hole. Watching Yuki leave, Milk returned to his workshop, but he didn't continue working. According to Yuki, he would be back soon. Milk didn't want his work to be interrupted again, so he might as well wait and take a rest. While Milk waited for the reply, Yuki, after leaving the heavy hole, directly stuffed the things into his space. He had taken quite a lot of the milk stardust. He naturally wouldn't give all of it to Milk 2, she didn't need that much. Giving her a portion was enough. Over a distance of dozens of kilometers, it didn't take long for Yuki to return to Milk Mountain. He took out the materials just before he arrived. Mr. Yuki, you're back so soon. Seeing Yuki return, Milk 2 was also stunned. That was the heavy hole, how could he be back so quickly? She even suspected he hadn't found her father. But one look at the milk stardust, and she dismissed that thought. She had seen the milk stardust before, this was the real thing. Which meant Yuki had definitely been to the bottom of the heavy hole. I'm back. But I have to go back again. This is a letter from the first generation Milk. After you read it, give me a reply, and I'll take it to him. Yuki said after putting down the materials. Chapter 139, Enbu's Advancement, the exclusive knife is complete. Milk 2 took the letter and tore it open, her hands trembling slightly as she read the words her father had written. From the letter, she finally learned the truth of the situation, the full story of his departure and the reason he hadn't returned. It wasn't because he was displeased with her or didn't want to see her. On the contrary, it was because he cared so much that he didn't dare come back. After finishing the letter, tears streamed down her face. At long last, the questions that had plagued the father and daughter were resolved. Though they hadn't spoken face to face, she now understood his true feelings. Thank you so much, Mr. Yuki. If it weren't for you, the problems between my father and me would have never been solved, she said after wiping away her tears. A smile finally broke through, the doubt and anxiety in her eyes vanishing completely. Don't mention it. After all, you promised to forge a knife for me. Yuki replied with a smile. This was, at its heart, a transaction. While seeing the issue resolved was nice, he was still more focused on his knife. Rest assured, Mr. Yuki, I will begin working on it immediately. Master had you bring back a great deal of material, and now with the milk stardust, I can forge the strongest possible knife. By the way, do you have the knives you've used before with you? I need to see them before I can forge a new one. Milk 2 asked. Yuki immediately took out the 7-star knives. These are all the knives I've used. But you don't need to make this many. Just forge one similar to this. Yuki said, picking up his favorite. For him, a single blade was more than enough. Anything more was unnecessary. With his current level of knife skills, he could handle any ingredient with any knife. What he needed now was sharpness and hardness, the shape no longer mattered. What a peculiar set of knives. Judging by their shapes, they must have been designed for preparing a wide variety of ingredients. Milk 2 could tell the purpose of the 7-star knives at a glance, but she was also curious about who could have forged them. The material used for the set was poor, resulting in mediocre hardness. However, the forging process itself was very special, making them a fine set of knives regardless. But they could only be used to handle simple ingredients. The moment you tried to process something larger, they were useless. It just went to show the vast difference between the world of Cooking Master Boy and the world of Toriko. And these knives, they have their own consciousness. Milk 2 remarked. Mr. Yuki, since these knives already have their own will, I was thinking. I could reforge them, adding the fossilized fang of the Dragon King to create a completely new knife. However, if I do that, the size of the knife will not be the same as it is now. For a master knifesmith like Milk 2, it would be a terrible waste to simply discard blades that had gained their own consciousness. The best path was to preserve that consciousness while forging them into a new, more powerful blade. But doing so would require a lot more material, and the resulting knife would be much larger than Yuki might have expected. She needed his permission. If he disagreed, she wouldn't push it, she would forge the knife exactly to his specifications. In that case, let's go with your idea. But please, try to control the size a little. As long as it doesn't end up as some multi-meter-long super knife, it's fine. Yuki agreed. A bit bigger was fine, something like Yuda's versatile medicine knife would be no problem. But he didn't want it to be like the monstrous blades her father had forged. Though he could still use such a weapon, it would be terribly inconvenient. I understand. Hearing this, Milk 2 smiled and nodded. With his approval, she could now forge a knife that would truly satisfy her. The knife vibrated slightly. As for the quality of the new blade, it wouldn't be an issue. In the original story, Komatsu's new knife had also incorporated his old one. The process wouldn't have a significant impact on the final hardness and sharpness. Alright, you should write your reply now. I need to spend some time in the heavy hole, so I'll leave the knife in your hands. Yuki said. Milk 2 nodded quickly, wrote her reply, and handed it to him. With the letter in hand, Yuki once again set off for the heavy hole. With his previous experience, Yuki leaped down and quickly reached the bottom of the pit. The gravity, though intense, no longer posed much of a threat to him. After finding Melkai again, Yuki handed him the letter. Melkai had been waiting for it, and as he read his daughter's reply, tears began to stream down the hardened man's face. Only in front of his family would a man like him show such tears. Thank you so much. Melkai said, his voice filled with sincere gratitude. If it weren't for Yuki, he would have never known his daughter's true state of mind. Now, the issue was resolved. Don't thank me, it was nothing. By the way, would it be alright if I observed you while you forge? I won't make a sound. You know I've mastered food honor. Yuki asked. He was fascinated by the milk style of sharpening and forging. With his abilities, learning such techniques shouldn't be too difficult. You may. After a moment of thought, Melkai nodded. As Yuki had said, he had mastered food honor. As long as Yuki didn't deliberately make a disturbance, he wouldn't be affected. Young man, are you also interested in sharpening? Melkai asked with some curiosity. Forging and sharpening were not easy tasks. To reach his and his daughter's level required exceptional talent. In the original story, Komatsu had studied under Milk 2 for a few days, but it took him a great deal of time just to succeed once. In contrast, Milk 2 herself had succeeded on her first try out of 10 attempts. That feat had left Komatsu completely dumbfounded. It was a matter of talent, some things were impossible without it. Komatsu's food luck was a talent of its own. That was why other chefs found it so difficult to hear the voices of ingredients, but for Komatsu, it was as easy as playing a game. I am somewhat interested, but for now, I'll just watch. You have work to do. If I truly want to learn, I'll ask Ms. Milk later. Yuki said with a smile. He had to admire the man's dedication. To spend so much time on Ichiria's commission, he truly was a master of masters. And he wasn't the type to hoard his techniques. On the contrary, he was happy to pass on the sharpening skills he had developed. Hearing Yuki's words, Melkai didn't press the matter and returned to his work. He was now at the sharpening stage. The time required for this stage varied depending on the quality of the knife. This blade was being forged specifically to cut air, so its sharpness needed to be at the absolute peak. That was why he was spending so much time on it. As the sharpening began, a series of strange sounds echoed, followed by flashes of white light. This was the special characteristic of the milk style. With perfect sharpening, the blade would sing, and light would emanate from it. In fact, sharpening a knife was similar to cooking a dish, both were about meticulously polishing an object. Though Melkai's movements seemed repetitive, as if he were simply repeating the same motion over and over, that's not what Yuki saw. To Yuki, Melkai's movements were subtly adjusted with every stroke. It was these fine adjustments that allowed the blade and the stardust of milk whetstone to fit together perfectly. No wonder the milk style relies so heavily on talent. A normal person couldn't do this. After watching the process, Yuki understood. While the milk style had its own techniques, it depended more on the sharpener's own reactions. The sharpener needed to find the point of contact between the blade and the whetstone in an instant and then begin sharpening, making minute adjustments with every stroke. Forget everything else, that first step alone would be an insurmountable wall for anyone without talent. They would never be able to find the point of contact. That was why both the first and second generation milk had reached the pinnacle of talent in this area. Yuki didn't think it would be too much of a problem for him. With his reaction speed, control over his strength, and his enhanced senses of touch and vision, achieving this step wouldn't be difficult. As for the techniques involved, those were secondary. Once Yuki confirmed he could do it, he left a note and departed. He could just ask Milk 2 for the techniques when he got back. After leaving, Yuki found an empty space and began to train his Enbu. In this high-gravity environment, it was the most efficient way. Just like that, a month passed quickly. By now, Yuki could no longer feel the gravity of the heavy hole at all. The gravity here was over 100 times normal, even approaching 200, but now, Yuki could completely negate it with Enbu. Even so, his Enbu still hadn't reached the master level, the level just below the Monkey King himself. On Area 7, only a very few monkeys had reached that level, and they had become the leaders of their respective regions. It was just that the hunting system the monkeys had created was utterly ridiculous. It could only be said that monkeys will be monkeys, their mischievous nature was impossible to eliminate. Now that he had completely adapted to the gravity of the heavy hole, Yuki knew it was time to leave. Continuing to stay here, the rate of improvement for his NBU would be no different from training in the outside world. So, he decided to leave. Besides, he had to go pick up his knife from Milk too. After a month, she had surely finished forging it. In the original story, Komatsu's knife only took a very short time. He also planned to learn the special sharpening techniques. After saying goodbye to Melkai, who didn't have another letter for him this time, as everything that needed to be said had been said, he was now completely immersed in his sharpening. Leaving the heavy hole, Yuki didn't feel the expected sensation of being light as a feather. Because NBU had negated all the gravity, for him, there was no difference between here and the bottom of the pit. This training had greatly improved his NBU. As he returned to Milk Mountain, he saw that a neighboring mountain had a perfectly clean-cut slice taken out of it. This mountain was even taller than Milk Mountain, but it had been sliced apart, and the cut surface was incredibly smooth. It was obvious this was the result of Milk 2 testing his new knife. In the original story, Milk 2 had also personally tested Komatsu's knife after completing it. It was a common practice for sharpeners. But in the original story, she had underestimated the knife's sharpness, and one swing had not only cut through her house in Hot Spring but had also cleaved the entire Milk Mountain in two. Chapter 140, The Dragon and Phoenix Knife, Learning Sharpening Techniques, a New Master Sharpener. A knife forged from the Fong of the Dragon King was terrifyingly powerful. Milk 2's own combat power was average, only around level 20 to 30, but with such a knife, she could cleave a mountain several thousand meters high in a single, effortless swing. After that knife came into Komatsu's possession, even though he was a weakling in terms of combat, he could still use it to slice through the walls of the gourmet pyramid. Yuki even suspected that if a being with a capture level over 1,000 were to wield the knife her father was making, could they slice an entire continent in half? In any other world, a milk knife would be considered a divine weapon. But in the world of Toriko, they were just kitchen knives. And in the late stages of the story, almost no one used weapons. Only Master Jiro would use the full set of Wolf King fangs, and even then, it was just to unleash his Guinness punch. When using other techniques, Jiro didn't use the gauntlets. Joie used Frozie's exclusive knife, Cinderella, but against Midora, Cinderella couldn't even scratch him. So, the later in the story the more fragile these divine weapon-like knives became. After all, in the late stages, these beings could treat the earth like a marble, their strength was terrifyingly immense. No matter how powerful these knives were, they were still forged from materials found on earth. They couldn't possibly contend with such powerful beings. That's why in the later battles, everyone fought with their bodies. No one used weapons. With the power of calories, their bodies were the strongest weapons. There was no need for external tools. Seeing the state of the mountain, Yuki's anticipation for his own knife grew. He sped up, arrived at Milk Mountain, and met with Milk 2. Mr. Yuki, you're finally back. I've finished your knife. This is the best knife I have ever forged. Seeing Yuki, Milk 2 quickly brought out a box. The box was about 1.8 meters long, clearly, the knife inside was not small. Opening the box, Yuki saw a kitchen knife shimmering with a faint blue light. The body of the blade was adorned with a dragon motif, and the handle had dragon scales. The spine of the blade wasn't overly exaggerated or ferocious. The knives Milk 2 forged were different from her father's. The first-generation Milk liked to add strange shapes to his creations, making them look menacing at first glance. Although Milk 2 had often forged similar knives to impersonate her father, it wasn't her own habit. So, Yuki's knife looked quite exquisite. The total length of the knife, including the handle, was about 1.7 meters. Yuki lifted it directly from the box. Instantly, the dragon motif on the blade began to glow with a golden light. At the same time, Yuki saw that the other side of the blade was adorned with a phoenix motif. The dragon and phoenix motifs on the blade, they weren't left by me. They appeared after the knife was completed. I thought they were just patterns, but I didn't expect them to glow. It must be because you are its master, Mr. Yuki. Milk 2 was also surprised. She had forged this knife, so she knew it inside and out. But she never expected that in its master's hands, the dragon and phoenix motifs would actually glow and change color. You said before that the 7-star knives had their own consciousness. You mixed those two into this new blade, so of course, it would only recognize me as its master. Yuki said, looking at the knife in his hand. He then walked out of the house. Milk 2 knew what he was about to do. He was clearly going to test the blade. Mr. Yuki, this knife is incredibly powerful. You saw that mountain, right? That was the result of me testing it after I finished. So, you need to be a little gentle when you test it. Milk 2 advised. She wasn't clear on Yuki's full strength, but he had been able to travel to and from the heavy hole so quickly, which was enough to prove he was far stronger than her. If she could cleave a mountain in two with one swing, then it would be no problem for Yuki. So she had to remind him. She was afraid that one swing from him would not only destroy the surrounding mountains but that Milk Mountain itself wouldn't be spared. Don't worry, I know my limits. I'm well aware of the power of a milk knife. I'm not going to use these mountains for target practice. With that, Yuki swung the knife with all his might. A colossal blade of light shot towards the sky, splitting the clouds in two. The blade aura quickly vanished into the sky. Yuki could clearly see that it had shot straight out of the Earth's atmosphere. What incredible power! I just hope it didn't hit a satellite. Watching the blade of light shoot past the planet, Yuki could only pray for the satellites in orbit. A slash of that power was more than enough to slice through them. Now he could only hope none were in its path. Mr. Yuki's is strong. Seeing the horrifying blade of light Yuki had unleashed, Milk 2 now understood his power. Without a doubt, in her eyes, he was a powerhouse who could enter the gourmet world. I'm very satisfied with this knife. Thank you, Ms. Milk. But now, I have another matter to attend to. Could you teach me your milk-style sharpening techniques? Yuki asked. Sharpening techniques? Are you also interested in sharpening, Mr. Yuki? Of course, no problem. Milk 2 nodded. Her philosophy was the same as her father's. There was no use in hoarding techniques. Anyone who wanted to learn could be taught, except for members of the Gourmet Corp, of course. That's why in the original story, when Komatsu showed interest, she taught him directly. It was the same now. For Yuki to be interested was good news for her. After all, spreading the milk-style sharpening techniques was a good thing. Soon, led by Milk 2, the two entered the workshop. She then began to teach him some techniques. You succeeded on the first try. Your talent in this area is also amazing, Mr. Yuki. Seeing Yuki's first attempt produce the blade song and a white light, Milk 2 was astonished. Though she herself had done the same, she had seen others try. Besides her, no one had ever succeeded on the first try. Perhaps her father had, but she didn't know. So, seeing Yuki succeed at once was quite shocking. I watched the first generation Milk sharpen his knife in the heavy hole, so I remembered some of the techniques. But I don't know many of the unique techniques of the Milk style. He still has that important knife to finish, so I thought I'd come back and learn from you. Yuki explained. Milk 2 nodded. What he said made sense. Indeed, while he could have learned from her father, he had important work to do, so she was undoubtedly the best choice. In that case, I will teach you all the techniques of the Milk style. Milk 2 said with great seriousness. Her completely selfless attitude also earned Yuki's admiration. He knew he could never do such a thing himself. By the way, I also have some gifts for you. Yuki suddenly said. He then opened the box he had brought with him. He had taken it out after leaving the heavy hole. Inside, naturally, were clothes. Milk 2 had been raised by her father, but she had a normal understanding of gender and common sense. After all, this place was connected to the outside world. She could learn things through the internet. Her father, knowing he was a rough man, had also hired people to teach her when she was young. The reason she still wore men's clothes was for her disguise, to pretend to be her father. But now, things were different. Now that all the problems were resolved, she could naturally be herself. So, the gifts Yuki prepared for her were various kinds of women's clothing. Milk too was actually very beautiful. With a little dressing up, she would be a great beauty. When Yuki explained what the gifts were, Milk too blushed for a rare moment. Women's. Milk too was about to refuse, but her eyes kept glancing at the box. She wasn't completely uninterested, she just didn't want to show it in front of others. Milk too was a bit of a tsundere. Also, I can help you remove the scar on your face. While the scar makes you look quite heroic, it does affect your appearance somewhat, Yuki said. Milk too wasn't as rough as her father. It was clear she cared about her appearance, otherwise, she would probably be covered in scars just like him. With a normal understanding of gender, Milk too was obviously a normal woman. The scar on her face was something she didn't want either, but it had been there since she was a child. Even though it had faded a bit as she grew up, it was still visible. See, can you really? Hearing this, Milk too's eyes lit up. Of course. Actually, this place is still a bit too isolated. While you can learn about the outside world through the internet, many things you only know after experiencing them. Not only can I remove the scar on your face, but in the land of healing, life, that's where the revivers gather. Some of them could also easily remove the scar on your face, Yuki said. He wasn't just talking nonsense. After all, revivers like Yasaku could even make people regrow severed limbs. It would be impossible for other revivers not to be able to remove a single scar. It was just that Milk too hadn't delved deep into these things, so she didn't know. Then I'll be in your care, Mr. Yuki. Hearing this, Milk too realized that perhaps she really should go down the mountain more often. But for now, it was better to get rid of the scar on her face. Yuki's method of removing the scar was very direct. He simply used life energy to stimulate cell fusion, and the wound naturally disappeared. It's really gone. Milk too looked at her exquisite face in the mirror. Not only had the scar disappeared, but the life energy had also given her a complete beauty treatment, making her face even more beautiful. She then took the gifts back and began to teach Yuki the sharpening techniques. And once she started teaching, she began to doubt her own existence. Because Yuki's learning speed was simply too fast. She had also succeeded on her first try back then, but Yuki was on another level. His talent was incredibly strong, far beyond her imagination. She had thought his strength was similar to hers. But now, his talent had completely surpassed her. Mr. Yuki, your talent is too terrifying. You've learned everything in just a few days. Now you just need to practice on your own to fully master it. A few days later, Milk too said with a look of amazement. In just a few days, she had taught him all the sharpening techniques of the milk style. And Yuki had learned them all. As for what came next, he just needed to practice on his own. She had nothing else left to teach him. Milk too could already see the birth of a new master sharpener. Give him some time, not too long, and he would definitely surpass her, even her father. It's all thanks to your teaching. Thank you for these past few days, Ms. Milk. Yuki said his thanks and prepared to leave. Milk too had already changed into a long blue dress. It was clear she really liked these clothes. Of course, when she was sharpening, she would still change back into her work clothes. Milk too knew Yuki was about to leave, so she exchanged contact information with him. She also decided that after finishing the current batch of work, she would take a break and not accept any new commissions for a while. She needed to rest for a period of time. Yuki agreed with this. Ever since she took over the work of Milk, she had been working like crazy, with no life of her own. Work was fine, but a balance between work and rest was important. A proper break would be a good thing for her. That wraps up this part of What If Fishing System in Food Wars World. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Quick update. The series What If Transmigrated as a Kanto gym leader will be going on hold soon, since we've nearly caught up with the author. So now, I need your help picking the next project for the channel. I'm currently deciding between these three fanfics. What if Reborn in Highschool DxD is a Lucifuge? What if Transmigrated to medieval Pokemon world? What if creating the strongest Strawhat crew by reading manga? Please vote in the poll and let me know which story you'd like to see next. I'll take the top pick and start working on that series next. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.